So, I have to admit, I was having trouble finding a new topic for my next video, but due to recent events, I felt more compelled to, rather than bring out a lot of negativity in the world, I want to do something that might bring out a little bit more hope, especially for people in the LGBT community. So with that said, let's talk about one of my favorite movies from last year. Nimona, if you can believe it, might be one of the best LGBT inclusive movies I have seen in recent memory. For a movie essentially made for kids, this is one of the most bold and ambitious animated movies I've seen. It really takes the genre of animated adventure fantasy film and turns it on its edge, as everything I love seeing in an animated movie is here. It has now become an honest personal favorite of mine for simply being one of the most touching and simply relatable movies to come out in the 2020s. And yet, strangely enough, it's a movie that almost didn't happen. Let's start from the beginning, as this movie was initially based on a graphic novel of the same name. The comic was from trans comic book writer and showrunner of She-Ra and the Princess of Power, N.D. Stevenson. It's a really good original comic that manages to have some great representation of LGBT characters and story dynamics. It's about a shapeshifter who teams up with another villain in a world where they are seen as outcasts and a threat, only to realize that there might be different monsters in this world than expected. I don't want to go too much into detail with the comic for time's sake, but I like to point out that it has a neat art direction and a good story that does strive a bit different where the movie ultimately goes. Naturally, with a comic that's well received and revolutionary, there might be talks of media being made for it. So eventually, in 2015, it was announced that Nimona was getting an animated feature film from, of all studios, Blue Sky Animation. Well, Blue Sky was owned by 20th Century Fox, and Disney, in 2017, bought out Fox. Then 4 years later, the studio was shattered, canceling all of their films in production, including Nimona, which was next to be released.
Well, this sucked.
However, Disney ended up shopping the film around to where Annapurna and Netflix ended up reviving the project around 2022, and Nimona was scheduled for a 2023 summer release. It leads to one of the few canceled projects that ended up seeing the light of day due to how many artists and fan support it got. And when it finally came out, I knew Nimona was going to leave an impact. For something made for a younger audience, it's honestly really radical. So let's get into the story itself. Nimona starts out with a story about how a warrior named Glorith was seen as a hero for defeating the monsters from her kingdom. In the modern day, the setting has become a blend of futuristic and medieval setting. Their technology has advanced in a lot of ways, but other parts of their society and culture remain stagnant. In the kingdom, a commoner named Ballister Boldheart is called upon to become a knight, and we see that he's bracing for the responsibilities that will come with it. Luckily, he has a supportive boyfriend with Ambrosius Goldenloin, and it's clear that they're both excited for the future. The ceremony seems to go smoothly until suddenly the queen gets killed and Ballister is framed for it. In the mix of all of this, Ballister loses his arm, his boyfriend, and is forced to become a fugitive. But a little outsider notices Ballister's new criminal status. This is Nimona, a shapeshifter seen as sort of a villain in this world that she lives in, and she wants to team up with Ballister, thinking he's just as against the establishment as she is. Obviously, Ballister declines because he knows he was framed for the murder. So, it becomes an adventure where the two have to clear his name and find out who's really behind the death of the queen. From the opening, I was already hooked with how darker this setup is for something that's ultimately billed as a family film. I mean, the main character gets framed for a murder we see on screen. From that point on, I knew Nimona was going to be interesting. And while at first it seems like a typical buddy film, what makes it stand out is the choice to blur the lines between heroes and villains. The people labeled as heroes by the setting are hunting the main protagonist, and Nimona is basically an anti-hero. As the story unfolds, we find out more and more about how this world's righteous order is based on lies. And of course, I want to highlight that the main couple in this is actually an openly gay couple. Not to say this is the first gay couple in an animated project, but considering how rare it can still be, it's still super nice to see it happen here. I think before getting into more of the story and characters, I want to talk about a certain element of Nimona that really stands out. And it's something that you can tell just by simply looking at this movie. Nimona decided to do something a bit more unique in its stylized art direction. Rather than going with the typical CGI realistic looking textures that we see in most animated films, Nimona goes for a shell-shaded look. The influence of Spider-Verse is made very clear here. I've heard some criticism of the animation style, saying that it makes it look unfinished, but honestly, I couldn't disagree more. I understand if this sentiment came for another 2023 animated movie, but for Nimona's case, I think it makes this film stand out big time. It gives it a unique look because it makes a lot of the film's colors stand out more. The movie uses a lot of purples and pinks to make it stand out. The character animation contributes to the film's upbeat tone. You see a lot of characters be super energized from both their body movements and facial expressions. Nimona alone is such an expressive character who is full of personality. I love seeing every single face she makes. This is all highlighted even further with the action sequences, where we can see Nimona's shape-shifting powers take effect. The fact she's able to transform into pretty much anything makes the action so enjoyable to watch. A beautiful looking movie in nearly every single frame. But what I find even more beauty in is the film's incredible cast. The easiest way to start with Nimona is actually not with her, but instead Ballister, the character we see first in the film, and a pretty well written one to focus on. One thing that's interesting that the book changes is that it starts out as Ballister being a full-on villain when he meets Nimona. The whole queen assassination framing isn't there at all. He's still a villain, just with a moral code, where movie Ballister isn't really a villain at all considering he was framed. But all things given, I love this guy as a character. He definitely can be a little impatient, but given the situations he's in, it's a bit understandable. One thing he does in this movie that works for me is that he takes the time to learn about Nimona. Sure, him and her don't get along at first, but the way the friendship develops does bode well for the film's theme. Ballister still manages to be very patient with Nimona in the mix of the conflict, where others wouldn't give her the time of day. Ballister is at least able to hear her out a bit. Over the course of the film, the more he asks about Nimona, the more he starts being accepting of her, and seeing all the good she can offer. He makes for a great companion due to how he has all this great patience to him. I feel like part of the reason he's like that is because he too is also trying to have someone hear him out and be patient with him in the form of Ambrosius. It's great enough that this film has a full-fledged gay couple front and center, but even taking that out of it, this is just a really good relationship. At the beginning, you really see their care for one another so well, as when Ambrosius thinks Ballister isn't innocent, it becomes more tragic to see these friends drift apart. Ambrosius is disappointed that Ballister did something that he didn't think he would do, while Ballister is disappointed that Ambrosius believes that he did something he didn't do. It makes for a good conflict because you love these characters, and you want them to realize their misunderstandings. Throughout the film, you get a lot of them starting to slowly realize their mistakes, as, for one, they're willing to talk with each other about it. And second of all, there's even small hints of it through various scenes of them interacting with one another, even in funny ways. If there's one criticism of the film I have heard, is that sometimes the humor is not the strongest point. Now, I don't think Nimona is one of the funniest animated movies or anything like that. I think there are other films that excel further in that department, but I don't mind the humor in this all that much. Mostly because a lot of the humor that I like comes from the character interaction. For example, there's a part where Nimona is pretending to be Ballister, acting all over the top in imitation.
Hope you like freestyle jazz.
Ambrosius sees this, and the first comment he makes is,
He hates freestyle jazz.
It's a great joke because it shows how much they actually know each other, along with just being a fairly funny moment. There's other small bits of humor that are good too, and I feel like both of these characters can add to it. It also handles its tone fairly well for the most part, even if some of the humor doesn't always work. I know one complaint this movie got was the Brad guy because of how obnoxious he is, which I could see why. He's very much that annoying archetype, but
this guy looks extremely punchable.
You're right, he is actually extremely punchable.
at least the movie admits he's an asshole, so no hard losses on him. But even then, he's not the character that's the most hateable in this movie. Sure, he might be a dick, but at least you know for a fact he's a dick with less power. If you want to look at a truly deplorable antagonist in an animated movie, I give you the director from Nimona. No, not these guys. These guys are pretty cool, to be honest. I'm talking about her.
There is no greater calling than protecting this kingdom from evil.
When we first see this character, she's the bold assistant to the queen. She knows how to lead an army, and wants to protect the world from the monsters within. It starts out that way because we're introduced to this kingdom as one being protected by horrible creatures from the outside world. Of course, there is a twist that she's the actual villain of the movie, which is revealed later on when investigating the murder of the queen. They find out that she was behind it the whole time. There's a scene later on where they actually confront her on the situation and confesses that she did it.
I framed Ballister. I killed the queen.
Her motivation behind it was actually due to the queen's plan of having the kingdom be more open. This doesn't bode well for the director due to the already placed fear she has of the monstrous threats she was warned about over the years. She has such a visceral fear of it that it blinds her of any self-awareness that she might be overreaching a bit. Sure, her concern of the safety of the city is valid, but the problem is it's to a point where she's assuming the wrong things to be a threat. We'll know soon enough why the threat she's so against is not what it seems. Yet, don't forget, the simple fact that she murdered a queen over this, when there should have been more of an open dialogue between the two. The director is a selfish and calculated villain that just feels very despicable. Maybe not the most unpredictable villain turn. I mean, she'll probably kill 1,000 monsters before she let this dreaded cliche die. But the fact that she has no remorse on what she's doing, despite the harm she's bringing upon the world she's in charge of, that's what makes her so hateable. It's one of the most neatly crafted moments in the film, just for really emphasizing how this character uses her trauma for more malicious intents, even if it is out of fear of something she was told about. The movie has a great theme of not trusting everything you hear on the internet. As Nimona says,
You should be questioning everything right now.
don't just stick to assumptions based on one random post that appears. The fact that she has such a control on the narrative makes her way more despicable. If there's anything about this scene that I wish I could change, is that I do think for as much as I don't mind the humor, one of the weaker humorous moments was the reveal of Nimona being disguised as Ambrosius. I get what they're doing, and it's not completely out of character, but considering how dramatic and dark a reveal that is, it just felt a tad unfitting. Fortunately for Nimona in the game, they have footage of the Queen's confession. It leads to a lot of fun, including a montage. Now, like I said, we've seen this kind of scene before, of course. The classic, I'll kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die moment, where the villain is exposed for their real self. However, one thing that makes Nimona stand out is that usually most films, this is the climax. But in Nimona, it's still only halfway through. Because there's a control by the director in the kingdom, she actually ensures them, oh no, it wasn't me, it was them. The unfortunate disadvantage of Nimona's shape-shifting powers is that it does lead to her to be more susceptible to other people's appearances. So, naturally, she's easy to be blamed for posing as the director. This is also bad as it makes others turn on one another as well. All around, her campaign thrives on hatred. But still, Nimona does seem to get a bit of a movement, and it does lead to a lot of great action sequences. Quick side note I wanted to mention is that the soundtrack is also awesome. A really good score throughout that has an iconic theme, and the licensed songs aren't too shabby either. with the highlight being easily Metric's Gold Gun Girls. Plus, it's another movie that leads to Chloe Grace Moretz kicking ass in a scene where they play a rock cover of the Banana Splits theme song since Kick-Ass. Though as cool and radical as that scene is, we get a moment where Nimona tries to confront a kid, and that leads to the kid calling her a monster. And that's something I really want to emphasize now with this video more than anything else. I mean, obviously it's the title, but we really gotta get some spotlight to Nimona herself. Or their selves, in this case. The main thing to note about Nimona is that she is a shapeshifter, and a chaotic force to be reckoned with. She's unapologetic and doesn't really give a whole lot of answers to her powers. We don't know how they came to be. In the books they do explain she's cursed, but in the movie it's left rather mysterious. Nimona is the only person to do this. And here's the thing, the explanation on how she got her powers doesn't quite matter. What matters is how the story emphasizes what her powers mean. And with this being an LGBT film, it's most certain that this is supposed to represent being non-binary. Nimona actually explains it best.
I feel worse when I don't do it. Like my insides are itchy. Then I shapeshift, and I'm free.
Basically, she does this because this is how she feels free. She's not confounded by what the world sees her as at first glance. She's able to just be allowed to be whatever she wants to be at any given moment. There's a point earlier on where Ballister asks if she can change back to make it easier, and she replies,
Easier for who?
which brings up a good point. If it's still the same initial person that's having a different appearance, should that really matter if you're having a conversation with, despite them not being how they initially looked moments ago? To her, she should be able to be herself, which can vary depending on how she feels. It's a neat play to not be confined to gender roles, and for a kids film to have that makes it even more special. It shows more the acceptance of people who may exhibit numerous ways of expressing themselves with how they look, especially since this tends to be a struggle with identity in general, feeling the need to mask yourself from the world just to simply fit in. Nimona deals with that as she changes herself just to comply with the people or things around her. Yet, she embraces the changes she goes through because she doesn't feel restricted to masking. It's something that a lot of people who struggle with being themselves have to face. Masking your identity just because you're afraid of being alone. And seeing Nimona on screen being this unapologetically herself creates for a great character that's relatable to anyone who dealt with this kind of masking in the past. However, there is unfortunately a dark side to it all. And it all comes from an element that makes Nimona a bit of a flawed character, but from an understandable place. Nimona is seen as a bit of a chaotic wild card and an anti-hero, as while she doesn't do it to everyone, she does showcase a lot of bloodlust.
Sick arm! Did it bleed a lot? What? Did they let you keep the old one? No.
She's willing to take action against the ones who screwed her over in the most extreme of ways, which, yes, she might be going a bit too far. But let's see what might have caused her to be like that in the first place. That scene I mentioned earlier of the kid calling Nimona a monster really comes into play here. While Nimona showcases a lot of animosity towards those who have already picked on her, notice when interacting with the kid, she reverts to looking like a small child as well. She wanted to show the kid that she's actually safe, even despite being vulnerable and not threatening. The little kid went away with her mom in fear. Nimona then is suddenly reminded of the harshness of her reality of being someone different. The main reason she fights back is due to the trauma of her being told that she is already a threat to the city. She has to fight back because otherwise no one will protect her, because of the already preconceived biases the world has that someone like her shouldn't exist. In a way, it's mostly out of self-defense, as earlier on, we notice she doesn't go for anyone. It's usually just people who wronged her in the past. Which, yeah, revenge isn't always the best option either, but for one thing, she does showcase some growth later on, not just resulting to the death blows.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him.
Though, more importantly, She didn't hurt that young kid holding the sword. In fact, she wanted to be aware that she is not a threat to that kid. A kid like her wouldn't hurt Nimona right away. So Nimona ensures that she's not a threat. Yet the kid still rejects her offer of kindness. Not because the kid necessarily knew who Nimona was, but more so what the child was told what Nimona was in this world. A threat. It leads to one of the most gut-wrenching lines in the whole thing, and one of the first of many moments to appear in the film that's truly heartbreaking.
Little kids. They grow up believing that they can be a hero if they drive a sword into the heart of anything different. And I'm the monster?
I can't think of a better way to put it, because there's truly nothing more defeating than being told you can't fight against the hate perceived against you, because society has already claimed you're the bad guy in this world. Despite the fact the only crime they claim you've committed was being different than everyone else. This is a feeling so many people who are gay, trans, or non-binary have, that they don't feel like they're allowed to exist in this world. Nimona mentions that this mindset leads her to believe that sometimes she wants the one doing the stabbing to end it all as well. The violence perceived to these groups is simply unacceptable when occurred, and that feeling of not handling living can make a spirit damper. Meanwhile, the most hateful rhetoric is allowed to exist, and because they're in charge, you can't change the status quo. It is a lot of bullshit that I think everyone needs to stand up again. And the fact that a movie like Nimona is tackling this makes it one of the boldest kids movies of this generation. It leads to a third act that possibly turns Nimona from a great movie to one of the most personal and beautiful films I have seen in the last few years. An act where all is revealed. A common story trope we've seen often is the reveal of what was known at the beginning of the film was not what people think when it came to the main conflict. There have been plenty of stories that take the idea of characters initially knowing their history, only to find out that there was a lot that barely anyone knew about. It can lead to a twist that characters who we thought said who they are turn out to be the bad guy. Or in this case, it's about a history that was well over exaggerated than it was. Not to bring up the worst episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Look, it's the Great Divide, the biggest canyon in the Earth Kingdom.
Let's keep flying.
Say what you will about it, but if there's anything I can appreciate about the Great Divide, it's this. Any story about a conflict that's been going on based on something that happened many years ago to the point no one remembers the full details, only to be revealed it was greatly exaggerated, is a smart move. While holding traditions and values are important, sometimes what we were taught wasn't always the right way. It can blind you from making progress with other people if you're just basing things on a time you weren't there for. For something like Avatar to tackle this theme, that's a smart move, except for, well,
Or you could call it lying.
the part where Aang is like, oh yeah, I made this shit up. Not a good look, Avatar. Nimona actually does a similar thing, in the sense that it's about the realization that the past that people are having wars and conflicts over are likely more over-exaggerated than one would think. As after a meeting between Ballister and Ambrosius, it's revealed that Nimona might be the creature the city has been discussing this whole time. You get the typical third act breakup between Ballister and Nimona, with Nimona being incredibly offended that despite all of their efforts, Ballister still sides with the city. As she taunts Ballister to call her a monster, she sees him draw his sword, leading her to be distraught that someone that she thought was a friend was going to potentially kill her. Nimona runs away to the whale that was mentioned earlier within the film when she was talking about her backstory, where we see what really happened through a sequence with very little dialogue and a beautiful musical piece by Christopher Beck. the actual theme of Nimona, very quiet and soft compared to the chaotic energy we've been used to. We flash back to 1,000 years ago, back when Nimona was significantly younger. She was just all alone, by herself. But she had the power to change into anything she wanted to. The problem was getting others to realize how special that was. Every time she tried to interact with another animal by taking their form, they leave. They disengage, leaving Nimona to feel like she can't find anyone to relate to, despite how hard she tries to fit in by appearance alone. Then something happened. She sees another little girl, and that girl sees her as well. But this time, she isn't frightened. She isn't disinterested. But instead, she wants to get to know Nimona. The two hit it off beautifully. The young girl sees the specialness that Nimona powers can offer. How freeing it can be to be who you are and not be judged. Even if it's only one other person sharing that experience with you. For the first time in her life, Nimona feels like she belongs. It's a feeling that is short-lived. As then, her friend's parents see Nimona, but rather than welcome her to open arms, they see her changing and assume the worst. They look at her with fear, only for both to ensure they mean no harm. It doesn't work, as more people gather around Nimona, with pitchforks and torches, thinking that she is a threat to their world. To make matters worse, a freak accident occurs, causing a fire and destruction throughout the whole village. The very same one that would eventually become this kingdom. Then it hits you. That great war that was fought years and years ago to fight off the dangerous monsters of the world, this was it. Not a big battle, a misunderstanding that went horribly wrong. Glorith, this noble and great warrior that was built up over the years, was just this young girl who was pressured to reject Nimona as a friend. The monster in this story was Nimona. However, she never meant to be. In fact, she never wanted that. She only wanted to be accepted. But she couldn't, because she was different. This whole thing wasn't a big war at all. It was the story that was exaggerated to make people who currently lived in the city feel good about themselves, while the outsiders are told to go back because they're seen as a threat. Possibly the biggest reveal that truly adds to the heartbreaking nature of this scene is the callback to an iconic line. Go back to the shadows from whence you came. From the beginning of the movie and throughout, we hear it as this heroic triumph against the evils of the world. People say this with honor as a way to show they're the heroes if they reject the monsters that come into their lives.
Go back to the shadows from whence you came!
Yet, we see it through Nimona's perspective. We see not only what actually happened that was over-exaggerated, but we also see what that phrase actually means to Nimona.
Go back to the shadows from whence you came.
We see now it wasn't a heroic gesture. For Nimona, it was just a reminder. A painful reminder that she's not allowed to exist. She's different, but that's enough for people to see her as not like them and to be rejected. And the worst part about all of this was from the only person she considered a friend. The only person to accept her for who she is. And the only thing she ever wanted, be accepted and loved by one person. To feel like she's not alone in the world. And she can't even have that. Nothing can ever be more heartbreaking than that. This leads to present day. Nimona is still angry at the world for telling her that she isn't anything more than a monster. She was already told that by her only friend 1,000 years ago, and was reminded of that yet again, when the first person in a long time she would have called a friend gave her that painful reminder. She does the only thing she can think of in her lowest moment like this, become exactly what they told her she was. In the climax, we see Nimona turn into a dark, shadowy figure, highlighting that the creature they see is one from a deep, dark depths that they believe evil existed. She comes into the city as this monstrous figure where everyone runs away from her in fear. She rages at the glorification of killing someone like her being a good thing. She can't take a world where simply existing is enough for people to turn on her. But if she fights back in any way, she's the villain in this story. Something that anyone can deal with if they're gone through some sort of prejudice of their own, whether it be based on race, gender, religion, sexuality, disability, interests, or even just the way you look and act. The simple fact that because you're different, that's an excuse for someone to be cruel to you. Meanwhile, you can't fight back. Nothing hurts more than being constantly reminded that you're worthless every day, only for when you finally seek help, you're just told to suck it up and get over it. Yet the direction never goes to the person inflicting the harm. It feels like because the person inflicting the harm has more power in some way, they can get away with it. Your cries for help don't matter and are ignored compared to the fake cries that were made because the person hurting you felt hurt from your defense from the violence they committed onto you. It's a feeling that never made any sense. And to this day, I still don't fucking get it. And I wish I did. This is the feeling Nimona has right now. A feeling I all know too well. One that made her think of this.
I don't know what's scarier. The fact that everyone in this kingdom wants to run a sword through my heart. Or that sometimes I just want to let them.
The lowest of the lows. Nimona tries to stab herself through the statue of Glora, the person that reminded her that she is seen as a monster. Then something happens. A hand is felt. It's Ballister. After knowing Nimona for so long and seeing who she really is, he goes up to remind her that he sees her and she's not alone.
I see you, Nimona.
Something that, again, she's always wanted. Someone to see her and accept her for who she is. Someone who wouldn't run away. Someone who wouldn't want to hurt her or ignore her. Instead, she gets someone who's patient with her, willing to protect, willing to give her a fighting chance when no one else would. That's something I always have to remind myself too. That there are people who will see you. You might not feel it at the moment, but you're seen by someone. Maybe a longtime friend, a family member. No matter who or where they are, someone will be accepting of you and is willing to love you no matter what. It's tough sometimes, but when that reminder is given, it is one of the most hopeful things I can ever think of. Ballister gives Nimona that validation that she is allowed to exist. She is allowed to be seen and heard, and not into the dark to be left alone. She needs a friend to guide her through this world where hate is everywhere. It's a step to make everyone else realize that Nimona is not a threat. It just takes Ballister, one person, to make everyone realize that Nimona is not what she seems, and it actually works. More people realize that Nimona is someone that needs love and deserves to live as much as anyone else. Not everyone, though.
Fire the cannons.
The director, even in the mix of seeing everyone realize that Nimona isn't a threat, still calls for a firing. Not only does she not care that no one sees Nimona as a threat anymore, but she doesn't even care for the people surrounding her that will be killed when the laser is fired. She completely ignores the fact that she will be hurting and killing the people she swore to protect. The rage against the monsters being killed is more important than the innocent lives of those who see the monster as a non-threat. Thankfully, Nimona uses this as a sacrifice to the kingdom, where she heads on to attack the director, only for the last time we hear the famous phrase, except this time being shown as the reveal of who the real monster is.
Go back to the shadows from whence you came.
In terms of villain deaths, all I gotta say is
Good.
As for the ending itself, I do see some people being ultimately mixed on, for one reason. Ballister is back together with Ambrosius, and he reflects on the friendship he had with Nimona. We see now is that people saw her sacrifice as her being a hero. While she might have passed on, the memory of her lives on. Or is she a memory?
Hey, boss.
Yeah, it's somewhat revealed that there's a good chance that Nimona is still around. And I know some would have preferred if she stayed dead. I get it for the sake of narrative structure and the realism of having kids learn to accept loss when it happens. But honestly, I don't mind a hint at a return. Mainly because, well, she was in the shadows for so long. I don't think it's fair for her to be just dead, if I'm being honest. After all, it's a family picture. But more so in the fact that the movie keeps certain things vague for the sake of what it's trying to focus on. The focus of the message being about acceptance, as we never know a lot about what entails of Nimona's powers exactly. But that's not the point of the movie. Sometimes movies are more about the experience than the little details. And in the case of this, the powers don't matter. It's what it is meant to represent as being someone who can be varied in their identity and not be afraid about it. The movie is about accepting those who can look different and act different, and trying to be patient with them in a world where no one else can give them that patience. It's a beautiful message that's connected with a lot of people in the LGBT community, and it got a lot of critical acclaim. The biggest victory for Nimona was the fact that this was nominated for Best Animated Picture. And to a strong extent, I think this was the real victory regarding that award. Sure, many would argue Boy and the Heron deserved the honor that it got, or that Spider-Verse 2 was just as worthy for that award. Though, to a strong extent, a part of me would have been a tiny bit happier if Nimona won Best Animated Picture. To emphasize why even further, and to close out this video, it's time to discuss why the simple fact it's nominated, it's a victory unto itself. Now, I have to admit, the election anxiety wasn't bad enough in terms of things to hate from this year. There's been another issue that has literally been plaguing the internet and the world. The way higher-ups are seeing animation and the threat that looms this incredible art form. The issue of generative AI art. Now, for the record, this is the most cankerous shit I have ever seen in my entire life. Some of you are probably watching this and saying, well, I don't see what the big deal is. It's just making funny pictures and voices. It's not hurting anyone. To which I reply, oh really? Have you considered what's been going on to the people who made art prior to this? Have you ever considered the fact that people are seeing AI-generated art and the way it's been getting all this attention and being shared everywhere because you can create images instantly? Have you considered that doing all of that is exactly what higher-ups thinks the world wants? They don't have to hire artists to create concept art or animation. They can just get a computer to do it. They don't have to hire someone struggling to make ends meet because the project they were working on got canceled for a tax write-off and their previous work cannot be shown due to removal on streaming because they have a computer to give a prompt of something they exactly want for just mindless amusement. We have seen so many animators and artists trying to make the world fun by creating stories on how we go through life in their own ways. Artists are the kind of people to collaborate on a project because they believe that because of what they've been through and what they've experienced, that they can remind the world that they're not alone. Media can be very empathy-driven by showing someone a story that can connect with them, make them laugh, cry, or even think about the world in different ways than they once did. Animation is something I connect with as someone who thought I was alone in the world ever since I was a kid with autism, who felt isolated from others because they didn't feel like they belong. Seeing something unlike me move and being expressive in the same way I wanted to be without any sort of judgment made me hope that I can experience that love that these characters can experience for being their unique selves. Hell, it doesn't just stop there. When I got older, I realized more and more there were people on these movies that were building these worlds and characters to help make others understand the world better. It's something especially good for kids to have in this world, and even more so impressive that so many people are willing to take so much time out of their day to bring these worlds to life and give that human emotion to something that sticks and lasts forever. So when I see an AI generated video getting thousands upon thousands of views, millions of dollars being wasted on this shit, so many productions being canceled out of corporate greed and tax write-offs, and artists not being able to tell the stories they want to tell because it's not profitable enough, all I have to ask is, what are we doing? Why are we using this as a way to tell people who do make the world a better place by telling their stories that they don't matter? To me, this is not what the human race should be doing. Instead, we should be encouraging artists more than ever. Because, let's face it, the best movies out right now are so good because we have these artists doing exactly what they want to do. They're bringing a personal story into their world to make others feel like they're not alone in the world. And we're just turning it into a commodity for mindless entertainment. Art, in general, is a way to teach others about different experiences. And it doesn't matter what kind of person you are, whether it be gay, straight, trans, non-binary, white, black, Jewish, Asian, Palestinian, Muslim, have autism, ADHD. Some might say that the stuff that AI art is doing isn't as comparable as the horrible shit politicians are doing every day. But really think about it. Both social injustice and AI art seek to dehumanize what makes everyone unique and beautiful, trying to appease to the masses that the world is the idealistic place that will give you exactly what you want in the most soulless way by just saying this is how the world works. That's why many people question a lot of things. Social injustice silences those voices that need to be heard because they want to live a good life that's unable to happen due to people at the top saying that this is how the world works. AI art silences the voices of people telling stories from all of those different backgrounds, just to give you an image that gives you nothing of substance or value. And that's only one of the big issues of this generative shit. As if the environmental damage and safety precautions AI brings to the world isn't bad enough, of all the things people who embrace this, why is it that all of a sudden the value of something we can connect with, because it is our way of having our imprint last forever, doesn't matter just because some rich old exec doesn't care? Why do all these stories don't matter just because a few people who only see art as entertainment and nothing else get to make the calls? I don't know all the answers, but if you're watching this video, I want to suggest some ways of combating against that. And the biggest thing I suggest is similar to Nimona, let the artists be heard. If AI generated things are around, ignore it, block it, restrict it. Don't give it any of that attention it deserves. Instead, what you should be doing, share what artists are doing. Share what people are making pictures of to express themselves, to show everyone how they feel. Support them when they need funding, or just viewership on a project someone is so passionate about. And most importantly, tell others about their work to make them more seen. Because people and their work deserve to be seen. Especially in a time right now where fear and hate lurks in the shadows by those in the light, with power claiming that the unheard shadows are the evil ones. Fight back against that. Tell your friends, family, or anyone else that they matter, and they have no reason to hide. If anyone wants to hide, don't. Don't just sit there in silence. Convince those as best you can that there's nothing to be afraid of. What they've seen in the world is not accurate to the true feelings that people who hide in the dark have been having when told that the world would be okay if they didn't exist. In other words, be like Ballister. Be the person to show others that people of different backgrounds deserve the love they need. There are many ways to do this, from protesting, donating, talking to loved ones, or whatever else that I can't express enough here. And I don't think it's entirely impossible. One of the biggest hopes that gives me this is the fact that Nimona, the movie, was able to exist. Looking back on this was a project that was canceled while in production by Disney, the studio that wouldn't exist without the help of animation. They felt this project was unworthy because it wasn't profitable or too different from basic live-action remakes. Yet, what happened last year? They released Wish. And I think back a lot to how that movie could have been a true celebration of animation in their work, only to have turned out to be the most basic Disney film I've seen in a long time. I think back about how much I felt this movie didn't have the magic that Disney was known for. Yet, you know what movie did give me that feeling that I wanted from Wish? Nimona. This was the movie that felt more progressive and more like a revamp of a classic Disney animated movie than anything that was in Wish. Now let's remind us, which was nominated for Best Animated Picture? The one that Disney rejected at first, not their big 100-year anniversary. Well, as the old saying goes, when karma happens to the right person,
get what you fucking deserve!
But why is that? Why did Nimona win in the long run? Well, much like before, it's because people saw her. They saw her story as one that many would need during the time where they might feel more alone than ever. That there is a person out there that will help and fight for you, even when the world itself is against you for who you are. Nimona needed that reminder, and thankfully, a lot of artists did bring their story to life. The only thing I ask for now with this movie is please, whether it be Criterion, G-Kids, or whoever, give this a Blu-ray release. I'm not just saying that because I desperately want this movie so bad, even though it would be a good fit on my ever-growing shelf of movies that I own. No, I'm saying this more in a sense of, with the way streaming and studios are treating animation to the point projects can be rarely seen due to tax write-offs and removals, Nimona needs to be cemented as an artwork that lasts forever. A physical release would be great as a way of giving more opportunities for Nimona to be seen. More opportunities for people to see the story and character. More of a chance for Nimona's impact to last forever. Because the thing about art that AI can't replicate is that lasting impression that someone helped created this. Someone made a story and character to show what they're going through and wanted the world to see and understand their pain, to which, if Nimona gets that more often, I think it would be beautiful. In conclusion, I love Nimona. It's a movie that I highly recommend seeing if you haven't yet. I love her for the same way many people also love her. We love her because she is that reminder to come out of the shadows from whence we came, and that we can be allowed to exist. She is the reminder that we're not alone, and people will see you for the person you are. Because just being seen and heard is the kind of love everyone needs. So take that for what it's worth.
Little kids. They grow up believing that they can be a hero if they drive a sword into the heart of anything different. And I'm the monster?
Go back to the shadows from whence you came.
I see you, Nimona. And you're not alone.